Podcasting powerhouse Joe Rogan interviewed Men North of Richmond crooner Oliver Anthony this week. They discussed why Anthony's populist anthem resonated with so many Americans.
People are tired of being with, and it seems like people in power are always with people. And it's just, I think it's a natural inclination that human beings have, and I think the founding fathers of this country recognized that when they set up our government. They set up our government to protect it against tyranny. And they did it by having all these different branches of government, and they're all coordinated, and there's a lot of stuff that keeps people from just running it the way they want to run it, like a king.
Now both Anthony and Rogan mocked wealthy liberals who maligned the song as right-wing. Rogan in particular took a jab at the office's Rainn Wilson, who criticized the song. Take a look.
And then there was Dwight from The Office.
Oh, yeah.
He chimed in that if he was going to write a cultural anthem, what did he say? Something like he wouldn't write about overweight people on welfare. He would write about billionaires and their taxes.
Yeah.
There is nothing funnier than millionaires talking about billionaires. There is nothing funnier about millionaires pretending these billionaires are out of touch.
Oh, yeah.
And then, you know, take Dwight from The Office down to West Virginia. You know, take him through those coal mining countries. Take him through those places in Appalachia where people have extreme poverty. And pills have ravished those areas.
What is Joe Rogan's net worth?
I don't know.
How much was his podcasting deal on Spotify? I mean, I don't mean to beat up on Joe Rogan here.
Well, but he was saying the millionaires shouldn't complain too much.
Apparently he's worth $120 million. Now, I think it's...
Yeah, and he's saying that should bring with you a sense of perspective about your own wealth.
Right, but the underlying criticism was not at all addressed there. It is true that the enemy is not poor people who are so poor they need government assistance to have food. He's completely right that the target should be the 1%. I think that the song was good, but for that line. That line is what was the hook for so many liberals to presume it was a conservative anthem. And it feels weird in this conversation to not acknowledge that Oliver Anthony's actual critique was how the establishment of both parties seemed to try to weaponize it against each other without recognizing that he was making a criticism of everybody, all the elites in the political top. He came out after the GOP debate and criticized the GOP debate, the Fox News debate hosts, for choosing to integrate his song into the very first question, tweeting, "It was about you. I was calling out you." And it seems odd for Joe Rogan, and I confess I didn't listen to the entire conversation, but it feels odd for Joe Rogan, at least in the context of that clip, to be saying it's liberals who misinterpreted the clip. It's the establishment that misinterpreted the clip. And of all of the bad responses to Oliver Anthony, which I agree there were on both sides of the aisle, Rainn Wilson's criticism that it's good to have a song like this, but you should be punching up and not punching down at the least of these, is actually an important and correct critique.
I mean, he can punch at whoever he wants to punch at. Look, I understand that, people who like SNAP food welfare benefits are not like the major reason our government spends too much money. It's the broader entitlement system that people that not just overweight people or not just desperately poor people take advantage of, but everyone takes advantage of. It's our spending on all sorts of things. So you can't actually the fantasy that we could just control spending by getting rid of food aid is not accurate. So I think I agree with you. But it was the broader. I mean, to the extent I could discern a broader political message, it was he feels overtaxed. Right? He was mad. He was not mad just at the 1%. He was mad specifically at DC policymakers who have a tax and spend attitude about other people's budgets and bottom lines. And that's a message I can get behind.
Well, the argument that he was making was about how his dollar isn't going far enough. He's not able to purchase the kinds of house, the kind of food, the kind of lifestyle. He didn't name insurance or things like that, but he was making I think there is a line about my dollar doesn't go far enough, my dollar doesn't stretch very far. That is the fundamental critique. And yes, taxes are a part of it. Obviously, if you don't have very much money, the idea that some of it is tax is going to hurt you a lot. But the fundamental issue is, why isn't his dollar going very far? Why haven't his wages gone up? Why is the cost of living so high?
Because it's very difficult to build more houses because government rules have made it impractical, and it's difficult to import
Let's
more
say that's
food
true.
and
Should
more
his wages
medicine
be up?
and more.
Let's say that's true, because what we know to be a fact, what we know to be true is that wages have stagnated. What we know to be true is that the minimum,
true.
it 100% is true.
All right, if you say so.
What we know for a fact is that the minimum wage hasn't been raised since 2009.
The minimum wage doesn't. Most people make more. I mean, the minimum wage is different in.
We're
most
talking
people make
about
more
poor
than that
people.
anyway.
We're talking about West Virginia, where the minimum wage is the federal minimum wage because it's a conservative state where they don't raise the minimum wage.
You can raise the minimum wage, and then people whose labor is not worth that amount of money will just lose their jobs.
Okay, so I'm not arguing with you that again. Most people, including most conservatives, as we saw as evidenced by the success of a ballot measure in Florida, a state that voted for...
They don't understand Economics 101 either.
All right, so the poor people are stupid and don't realize that are wrong to want their wages to go up. I understand that's a perspective. They're just ignorant and they're voting against their interests. However, what poor people have said and working class people have said is that they want their wages to go up. And they want it to go up in the exact same way it's gone up in all of American history since the implementation of the minimum wage until it was stalled in 2009 artificially. So apparently there was cataclysmic horror from the time the minimum wage was implemented in the 1940s or what have you.
Often the minimum wage has been too low to have any, because it's too low to have an effect because people are all being paid more than that.
All I know is this, Robby. People sit around saying about yesteryear was so great. The 60s and 50s were so great.
I don't sit around saying that. People overly romanticize the past, where they had far less access to goods and services than we do today.
Robby, just everybody else.
That's a flawed and fantastical way of thinking. Things were not great or better before.
I think that's true. I think that obviously
people were poorer. People were much poorer. People had fewer cars on average. They had smaller homes on average. This fantasy that it was all better then, it's not true. It's just substantially not true.
In the 1950s, following the war, the government decided to implement policies that markedly, dramatically caused a spike in home ownership among American families, the ability for people to start to send their kids to college at increased rates. We had free public colleges and universities at a higher percentage, and people were able to graduate from college without debt. And the gap between what the rich and the poor were making was so much smaller.
And now we've had unprecedented subsidies of all those things, and as a result, they're wildly they're not affordable in a directly correlative way with how much money the government has funneled into them.
As I was saying, the gap between the rich and the poor, the CEO pay and worker pay used to be
no one cares
around
about that. No one cares.
Around 30 to 1. And now it's over 300 to 1. I think I recently heard it say it was more like 20 to 1 back then and closer to 400 to 1 now. And it's not magic. If that magic money didn't just come out of the sky and enrich CEOs and the very, very wealthy. It came because American laborers are incredibly productive. Productivity has been increasing steadily and consistently because of the value, the integrity, the hard work, and the intelligence of the American workforce. And despite working so hard, as many people who are watching this experience in their own lives, they seem to never be able to get ahead. 60% of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck. And they look at from a policy perspective of what changed between then and now. Back in the 50s and 60s, the rich paid much more into taxes, and people felt like they got more out of the benefit of their bargain. Many people in these social democratic countries in Europe, they are taxed at a high rate, but when they're asked about how they feel about those taxes, they're like, it's good because I feel like I'm getting something out of it.
But that's specifically what Oliver Anthony type people don't want, is more of their income taxed.
No, I'm trying to make exactly not that point, Robby. What I'm saying is, of course you're mad about taxes if you don't feel like it's being spent well. But the people in all of these social democratic countries in Europe, this is literally the point I'm trying to make, despite being taxed at much higher rates than Americans, have a much better satisfaction in what their government is doing with their tax dollars because, and this is the point I was about to get to, they have free health care all the time, no matter what. If they lapse payments, there's none of this premiums, there's none of the deductible, there's none of that, nothing. You break your leg, you get cancer, you go to the hospital, it's paid for. They have free education for their kids. There's not a such thing as graduating with student debt. They have deeply subsidized housing so that everybody in the country lives in high quality government-subsidized housing.
That's not true.
And they don't have these problems with violence,
everyone lives in
crime.
Their houses are smaller than ours on average. So they have less heating. They have it's not this fantasy that it's just better everywhere else is not true. In the UK, the average home is smaller than in the US.
Who cares how small the home is?
Well, I mean, that's,
people are homeless in America. They live in substandard housing. Just because you can throw up some McMansion in the middle of nowhere that some people, but most people cannot afford. Your square footage, people
you can afford it. There are plenty of places you can afford.
People love their quality of life in Europe because you live in densely populated areas where you can get to work and go to grocery shopping and do things by foot or on a bicycle, which is also, gotta say, good for the environment.
Liberals love that. Liberals want to live in tiny little personal shelving unit or something. That's all you have, and you walk everywhere. But people, working people they don't want that. They don't want to be a single person in a pod.
What are you talking about? What? You're saying that working people would rather not be living in big shambles, shacks, substandard housing than to have a small. That's the reality that we live in,
not the
Robby.
reality.
People can't afford homes. No one in America can afford homes.
No one in America can afford homes.
Yes.
That's not true. That's just not true.
We're living in a housing. Do you think there's not a housing crisis? Do you think that
the housing crisis is government caused?
That's not the
legalize
question.
Work, legalize building.
I'm not just.
And we can have more housing.
I literally opened this whole segment of conversation by saying, let's give that a given.
All right.
So what are you arguing against? You're just sitting here arguing that people shouldn't have more wages, that everything that exists in America is just the way it is and how it has to be, despite there being obvious historical precedent for things being run differently for the benefit of the American people. And here's the core truth of what's wrong with that one line, just that one line from that Oliver Anthony thing. He's playing into a trope that was used to crumble all of the benefits and the advantages that we had in the 1950s and 60s after the labor movement. Communists and socialists and labor activists worked hard so that we could have a 5-day work week, so we could get rid of child labor, so that we could have a minimum wage, so that we could have OSHA protections in the workplace, so that when your boss's machine cuts your arm off, you're not unemployed for the rest of your life, so that your grandmother doesn't die in the street of old age because she can't work anymore, and now we have Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. They worked and strove to have all of those things
that are
and the reason that we started having those benefits stripped away from us after all of the American people worked to have that for ourselves is because politicians realized that if you could argue that some poor fat person somewhere was exploiting the system, that it was better to get rid of the whole system in the first place. And what is tragic to me is that Oliver Anthony tapped into something real and it made a great song that tapped into something really real, and that one line demonstrated how easily that argument can be corrupted into focusing the energy on the least of these in a way that strips all of those advantages from so many people instead of focusing on the very top. Rainn Wilson was right about that.
We have some agreement.
And a millionaire Joe Rogan chuckling on a show about how Rainn Wilson is also wealthy completely misses the point.
We have some agreement. I don't think that it's not substantially poor or obese people on welfare that are like sapping our society of the resources or its vitality or whatever. I agree with you on that line, but we have fundamental disagreements on what the policies should be, and those come out in our discussions. As always, we'll have more Rising right after this.